Paul Jepson will speak first. Paul is a professor of ecotoxicology at Oregon State Universities, and among his many other responsibilities, serves as the co-director for the Western Integrated Pest Management Center. Paul has been closely associated with the center since its inception in year 2000, with the start of the Regional Western Weather Work Group in 2004. Currently, Paul leads the Center Pesticide Risk Management Signature Food Security Program that works to reduce risks associated with pesticide use in the West. One way the program does this is by supporting constructive discussions about the risks associated with the use of highly hazardous pesticides. Today, Paul will talk about how risk enters into the decision of which pesticide to use. Paul?
Thank you very much, Matt, and hello everybody from wherever you are. Great to be talking with you today. There's been a variety of funding mechanisms which I need to acknowledge for this work that's gone back through the years, but particularly USDA agencies and programs, to which we're eternally grateful. And currently USAID, as well as the Western IPM Center Signature Program. And we have a work group that comprises members of the IPM programs in most of the Western states and Pacific Island territories. And a lot of the ideas and kind of momentum behind this current work, which I'll be moving on to, is largely due to their amazing efforts and contributions. So I'm going to show a couple of slides that just give you an impressionistic snapshot of where we are, but back in that distant 2009 early tweens era in IPM extension in Oregon, we were trying to characterize risk in its various shapes and forms for farmers, including, of course, economic risk of not applying pesticide or selecting the wrong one or applying it in a way that may not be completely appropriate. But I just want to make the point here in a couple of slides that there's a lot of information, a great deal of information that gets factored into decision making. And there's no way that for every decision, all of these pieces can be fitted together in a sublime and perfect way. So here, for example, we had natural enemy risk for a series of pesticides used in Christmas trees, which is Benton County, Oregon's major crop, and they're a major Christmas tree producer for Asia, the Pacific Rim, and the Pacific Northwest. We looked at risk to pollinators because bees visit Christmas trees that have aphids in them that produce honeydew. We looked at risk to bystanders, aquatic life and wildlife because of concerns about risk to migratory salmon. We looked at pesticide resistance risks and said effectively to farmers, let's work together to make decisions about how to select materials. But this, of course, can be bewildering. And this was our attempt to distill information into a form that was pretty popular, but all the same, empowering people to make decisions often involves providing them with more sources of information than they really were aware existed, even though they might be interested in these. And this has continued to be an ongoing issue that we're addressing in our work group. In a later part of that decade, going up to about 2015, from 2008-9 onwards, we were working in West Africa as well as the Western United States. And there, as well as in the US, we're asking ourselves, how can we distill all of this science into information that can lead to behavior change, particularly eliminating hazards and risks that farmers themselves may not be aware of in regulatory jurisdictions that do not make all of the risks apparent on pesticide labels, as may be the case here. So we had a period of presenting information in the form of pictograms to farmers. And on the left-hand side here, you'll see applicator risk. And there's only one material of those listed here that did not have significant applicator risk. We looked at inhalation issues as well, and then restricted entry intervals, which was a novel concept to many farmers. And again, risk to aquatic life, domesticated animals and wildlife, bees, and now natural enemies. One thing we discovered in that era and our group has reinforced is that pictograms are only effective if supported by intensive training. And really, they're widely misinterpreted, and there's no evidence for us, we feel, to justify their widespread and continuing use, even though they're rather compelling and seem rather sexy at first sight. And so moving on, we'd done work with kind of 30, 50 pesticides, and ultimately working with the Sustainable Agriculture Network and Rainforest Alliance, and Oliver Bach and Maria Bonilla, colleagues shown here, and Katie Murray also as co-authors of much of this work. We have ultimately produced a list of 800 pesticides using the concepts that were behind some of that material I just showed you. And this is now in worldwide use by the Rainforest Alliance in more than 50 countries with some millions of farmers. And this has led recently in 2020 to a publication in Lancet Journal that uses Michael Edelston minimum list concept to ask the question, can we transition from higher risk pesticide regimes to lower risk pesticide regimes and somehow align better with IPM principles, which we've been aware of since a long time ago, the 1950s, but really have not taken to its fullest extent through the available science and information that's available. But again, there were a lot of lists involved. And if you want to use this work and download this open source paper, you'll find 650 or more pesticides listed with their risks compared using a variety of criteria. And so this led us, for example, recently in Kenya and Malawi to, again, present information to farmers as distilled as we possibly could at the time, we felt, in terms of the relative risks. And one thing we've introduced in this concept now is efficacy. So if there are materials that are labeled for a specific use, in this case against fall armyworm in maize, is there any evidence these materials are efficacious? Then of those materials, there's a subset of nearly 60 pesticides, of 8 pesticides that are low enough risk to be compatible with smallholder farmer use. But again, we have very extensive lists, and there may be no way around this, but we're struggling with in our Western group about how to translate this information into a form that readily leads to behavior changes and that can assist decision making rather than presenting what seems to be an overwhelming burden of information. So the Western Risk Work Group was formed in 2015-16. It was originally funded by the Sustainable Agriculture Program of the USDA in its western part, and now by the Western IPM Center. So thank you very much. The the work group itself has around 30 members in it, sometimes more, sometimes less on our calls. And they represent the Western states. And we've really shared an enormous amount between each other about interpreting and voicing and translating pesticide hazards and risks to farmer audiences and extension audiences. And we realize the complexity of this, and also that this is rather an aspiration rather than something that is easily achieved. So definitely we're pursuing a goal of advancing pesticide risk reduction as a part of IPM, but we're not discounting pesticides, and we're not painting all pesticides with the same brush. So one of the issues that we're attempting to address at the moment by collaborative work in a number of states is how to address the continuing use of what are called highly hazardous pesticides and other high-risk pesticides in IPM systems. One thing we certainly know is that some of these materials are recalcitrant. Uses are continuing, even though there are published requests in work that we've gathered ourselves for finding replacements for these materials. And there's no simple reasons and simple solutions to this challenge. So I'm going to just present to you now an idea that's in draft and about to be submitted for publication for the way we try and capture the pros and cons of different materials to extension audiences and in discussions ourselves. And that's really the purpose of this talk. So we've got multiple facets to pesticide risks and benefits. There are human health, environmental, resistance selection, economic efficacy, etc., risks to try and convey. there are multiple trade-offs there of benefit and risk that we try to capture as well as we possibly can in the USA in regulatory processes and extension. So we asked ourselves, are there some of these facets of risk that can be presented in terms of simple trade-offs? And yes or no, is this material risky? Is it not risky? And if that's possible, can we try and capture or portray all of these issues in some kind of simple graphic that could assist a decision where we truly are not very certain often about the factors that underlie why a particular pesticide is chosen. It's not the case that it's cheap, or it's always been used that way, or it's been pushed hard by an industry group or a non-profit or by extension. There's many complex factors to bear in mind, and presenting this in a neutral way that allows us to see a pattern, understand what's happening, and then promote a positive discussion about continuing use or alternatives. That's what we're striving to do. And one thing we've done is to think about using a diagram like this that operates like the face of a clock. And basically, we have highly hazardous pesticides here that may or may not be acutely hazardous. They may pose a risk, a chronic risk, for example, a mutagenic risk, carcinogenic or teratogenic risk, yes or no. And there are clear criteria outlined by UN agencies for this. There are certain environmental hazards that have a material fall into a highly hazardous pesticide category as well, such as biomagnification and movement through food chains. Then we certainly know that some pesticides require PPE and carry with them an occupational risk, that inhalation may occur with certain volatile pesticides with bystanders that may also be toxic, that aquatic risks can be defined in ways that we outline previously in our publications, and similarly terrestrial wildlife risk, and also pollinator risks that may require some mitigation. And so some of those risks can be characterized as a yes or no if you accept these boundaries and the criteria that have been published and that we've explored with many user audiences. But then efficacy is a complex challenge to address, but more or less efficacious or not efficacious is something we try and include, as well as more or less expensive in the system that we're working in. And of course, that varies by the wealth of the audience, the challenge of the pest control problem, and other factors. Whether or not alternatives exist has turned out to be an extremely important criterion, because in some cases, if there's nothing registered for that use, or there's no chemical, biochemical, metabolic pathway that's an alternative, then either you don't spray a pesticide or you use something that may confer other risks that need to be managed. And similarly for resistance, has this been documented or hasn't it? So already there's a pretty bewildering array there, but those 12 factors we've put into this diagram, where a kind of worst case scenario is that we'd have representation in the outer ring in all cases with a material. We haven't found this material yet, by the way, but if it exists, we feel that alternatives to it might be considered as appropriate. And then a desired state is a material that falls within all of these classes here. And we're not really factoring in the argument here whether or not pesticides should be used at all. We're accepting their use in an IPM context. We're accepting that they're used in a widespread way by farmers around the world in organic and sustainable, and also in highly intensive situations. So there's a kind of ideal. And what we've done is to try and draw this figure for different examples that we've come up with. So here, for example, for the pesticide oxamil in potato by my colleague Katie Murray, who for a long time was the inspiration behind and co-leader of our work group and a co-author on some of our articles, and still heavily involved, although she now works in another domain of pesticide and GM policy. And here we have a material that is quite efficacious, of reasonable cost, for which alternatives are not really available for its insecticidal and nematicidal uses, despite the fact there are widespread risks and it's classified as a highly hazardous pesticide. So here is one pattern that represents trade-offs for farmers that are very, very difficult to meet because of the need for continuing use of this materials in certain circumstances in very highly productive and profitable potato production systems in the Pacific Northwest in irrigated agriculture. Here with methamil in onion is another highly hazardous pesticide that is very potent in terms of the immediacy and severity of impacts on workers during use. And it's an unpopular material. Its efficacy is actually in decline and use is in decline, but historically it's been low cost, and although there are alternatives available, it's been somewhat relied upon as in onions as a go-to compound, and it characterizes one of the features of these materials. They can be sticky in the system to the point where resistance is conferred because of the beneficial properties that in farmers' views sometimes outweigh the risks, even if alternatives exist. Then for Linearon, here's work by Peter Ellsworth, Al Fournier, Naomi Peer, Jim Farrar, Tonya Lee Martin, and others in Arizona IPM and UC IPM, where this material has unique properties for use in umbelliferous crops, because it's non-toxic to umbelliferae, even though it's very potent and effective against the weed spectrum of those crops. And it has been argued that the presence of that herbicide helps sustain those industries in California and Arizona and leads to some of the high productivity to which we can attribute availability of low-cost carrots and other vegetables in our system in the US. However, it's also acutely toxic, and reading the EPA's own human health risk assessments for this material, it's very evident that it's a material for which alternatives, if they existed, would indeed be welcomed. But in this case, efficacious alternatives that allow this use to continue with the production system that's being developed seems to be a long shot. And so on and so forth. We characterize some of these patterns as the kind of kitten model on the top left here, and various others. We've got one that looks a bit like a penguin. However, this pattern that we see is incredibly helpful for us to try and understand how these factors differ between different uses of highly hazardous pesticides. And each case we've found where continuing use is occurring, there are clear benefits for them of continuing use against which risks and hazards must be aligned. So the work group has a publication preparation where we're kind of working through some recommendations for how to address these problems. But the calls for phase out and replacement of these materials, if not premature, it should not be premature given the long history of their use and evidence for significant impacts, has not always been backed up by practical support, resources, and consultation with farmers, which we feel lies at the root of being able to make progress. And pesticide science is coming somewhat out of favor of being able to present this information in this kind of way has been helpful for us. And we're putting it to you as an audience and to others that may watch the recording, that there's a method here that could help us get through some difficult conversations with farming audiences, regulators, standard setting agencies, and others for why some materials are persisting in our system and that serious efforts are needed if alternatives to be found and some of those hazards and risks are to be mitigated. So the possible benefits of this approach are it's pretty easy to compare alternatives. Materials with an outer ring, if I can use that term, flavor, certainly compared with materials that occupy the inner ring of that graphic, it does help people view choices in a novel way. It identifies areas that require attention where there are complex trade-offs involved, and it's a vehicle for conversation with stakeholders. And communication is what our group is all about, and it's the thing that troubles us most because it's difficult to do. There's also methodology there to track changes. But it's a yes-no system, there's no gradation there. But if you have 12 factors or more and then have gradations within those, that then gets beyond the mere human brain's capacity to make decisions and use that information, we feel. And there's also factors that may be missing. So that's the end of the talk. I really thank you for listening, but we're working through how to portray highly hazardous material use in a way that's respectful of the farmers that are using it, but also assist the conversation in how to find alternatives. And we're looking for any input, feedback from you and others about how this might work and uses that you might find for this technique. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. That was a terrific talk. I'm not seeing any questions yet in the chat. If anyone would like to post a question in the chat, I can read that out. Or alternatively, if anyone has a question, you can take your mic off of mute and pose your question directly.
Hey, Paul, this is Steve. Was there any thought given to, rather than drawing the circle, lighting up the pie slices, green in the middle and red on the outside, just to visually make it? Yeah.
There's quite a lot of conversation about using traffic light colors and having red and yellow or red and green. And you have to take into account color blindness there, of course, but it's that's a common suggestion and something I'm not very expert at, how to communicate things based on using color patterns too. We certainly talked about that possibility, and it would make things possibly more obvious. So yes, thank you for that. But the idea of capturing risks and benefits together in a single graphic is something that, although that graphics tile is used in other areas, particularly in international development, it's something we've not seen really done before. And so that's what we're kind of putting out there and trying to exercise. So it's very complex to put these things together. And we're trying to make it easier with a web-based tool that we're working on with USAID at the moment and an IT company in Portland. A couple of other things in the chat, are there?
Yeah, there's two questions in the chat, but I think there was somebody else who also was on the microphone asking a question. Did I get that right? Maybe not. Paul, can you?
Andy Ward from Crop Life's asking us, and hi Andy from Brussels, Belgium, I believe. Have you had any success changing the shape or provision or adding provision of PPE? And sorry, there's some interference on the line at the moment. But yes, the provision of PPE question. I mean, for the occupational risk, Andy, we might have, does it need high-level PPE or does it not need high-level PPE? And that's something we might talk about with you and others and our New Gross Shore in Eastern United States. And we're very interested in that possibility. And our collaborators in the Rainforest Alliance, the way we're developing and continuing this work at the moment is to factor in more detail on PPE. So that's a really good point. We don't necessarily want this to be viewed as an advisory document. It's more a methodology for capturing pros and cons and then comparing different methods. So how we use this and what we're trying to portray and what people take from it is something that we're hoping to take further. But thank you very much for that question. I hope I answered appropriately.
I think it was Andrew Sutherland who was going to ask a question, but his was on making a bit of noise, so I did mute him.
I know Andrew Sutherland has come up with the idea of having kind of political and liability constraints being one of the factors, because with the herbicide glyphosate at the moment, it comes into the public eye via the legal system and via the press, as well as through extension and other media. And some jurisdictions in California are being very careful with judicious use of that material because it raises controversy with audiences. And that is clearly a factor independent of the science and the evidence base. And so Andrew has raised that as a possibility. He's a member of our group, and in the publication we come up with, it's something we're going to very much include and discuss. but it just illustrates the complexity of this challenge, because it's coming to a global audience now in a way that's often rather unfiltered and presenting one aspect of an argument that's not always supported by evidence. And so it does trouble us that these trade-offs cannot be explored in a way that's supported clearly by science and evidence. And that's what we're trying to draw the conversation back towards, something that we can put our fingers on and say, you know, there's good evidence behind this, and we've got enough information here to differentiate these materials in our IPM system, as long as we don't overwhelm people with a decision-making burden.
Great. Thanks, Paul. I'm not seeing any other questions at this point.
Thank you very much.
So our next speaker is Carrie Winbill Rojas, who is the Associate Director for Urban and Community IPM and an Area IPM Advisor for the California Statewide IPM Program, which is part of the Division of Agricultural and Natural Resources within the University of California. She received a bachelor's degree in biology from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and a master's degree in integrated pest management from UC Davis, working with Larry Godfrey. Carrie's program has been innovating on new ways to reach large urban populations in California with integrated pest management information. And it should be pointed out here that her task is daunting. 3 of the 10 largest cities in the United States are in California. The only other state that can make that claim is Texas. So today she will talk about IPM and pesticide education, IPM and pesticide education for urban audiences. Carrie?
Great, thank you, Matt. I apologize, my neighbor is getting a storage pod delivered right now, so if it's rumbly, and hopefully it's over soon, but we'll just keep going. All right, well, thank you for having me today. So as Matt said, and as Paul has mentioned, a lot of this is kind of complicated, and urban audiences are challenging to reach within our capacity in cooperative extension, and given, you know, ever diminishing resources. But we do what we can, and I'm going to talk to you today about some of the ways that we in California and kind of largely in cooperative extension have attempted and continue to reach our urban and community audiences to get the information out there about pesticides and risk and health and all the things. So urban and community audiences, for those who may not be as in tune with them, the way I often put it simply is it's any person residing in our state, in our regions, wherever we serve, that is non-agricultural. And that could even mean the sort of newer burgeoning urban agriculture as an urban audience. But as you can see in the slide, we have retail nurseries, and we have the employees and the managers there. We have landscape professionals who are licensed, and structural professionals, you know, anyone in utility districts and municipalities, and as well, all of the residents that could be homeowners, could be tenants, could be property managers, schools that take care of our children, where our children go to school or childcare, and anyone. And right, anyone can get a pest at any time and need to find a way to manage it. So in California alone, we have close to 40 million people. Janet Hurley's on the call today, and Don Gouge and others from other states that have large populations as well. So it is quite an undertaking. Within California's UCIPM program, we are limited in staff. This is our small urban team. And so for just the state of California, of course, we partner with others. We don't just do everything in a bubble, and we have many resources to tap into, but we are the ones focusing on this urban and community outreach, and trying to get this important science-based information out to the residential public. And so it is a daunting task. There are many issues when we think about integrated pest management and pesticide use by especially untrained individuals. And what was already mentioned by Paul was You know, there's issues in the public about perception of pesticides. You know, glyphosate being a great example, and you can see my graphics there. There's a lot of misinformation I see on social media constantly, people not understanding what a pesticide is, that an herbicide is a pesticide, or concoctions that they might make up themselves in the kitchen thinking they are safer alternatives. But even if you don't make up something in your kitchen, there are hundreds and hundreds of products on the store shelves that unlicensed folks have access to. Plus, there are the licensed professionals that require continuing education to, you know, stay safe with their pesticide use, and also working with the residential public. And so with any misuse, misapplication of pesticides, there are, of course, environmental concerns, health concerns, exposure issues, and we have a lot of people to reach to try and get this information out there. So just quickly about what's on the store shelves, and this is a shelf survey that is done by UCIPM's Pesticide Safety Education Program. They look at and catalog the materials that are registered or 25B pesticide products in various store shelves throughout California every year. I believe they had to skip 2020 for obvious reasons, but there are a lot of products out there. There are more than 1,000 products with hundreds of active ingredients. And for all of those different active ingredients, it's how do we educate the home user about what's in them and how to keep themselves safe, and also the environment safe by not disposing improperly. We have realized from many years of working with both the extenders of our information and the general public themselves is consumers, they are untrained, right? They don't know what to look for with pesticides. We do know from much experience that residential users don't even read pesticide labels. And the more we have learned, the more we have shifted the way we are going to communicate this science-based information. And I feel like we are constantly changing the way we do this. And also, as Paul mentioned, right, the communication of this risk, the communication of the environmental and health risks is constantly evolving. But in general, we don't want people to expose themselves to pesticides. We don't want them to put things out there that are not going to be effective or work, and to damage our health and the environment. And with so many choices, you know, where do they start? So one of the things that our California UCIPM team has been doing is to try and train those who interact with the public more than just the 6 of us that I showed you on that earlier slide. And for those, and I think others from other states that are on this call today, training the master gardeners in our states, and also retail employees and others that may do some pest management either for hire or incidentally as part of their work. This is really important because we cannot reach all of the end users directly. And so we do our best to extend information to these magnifiers of education by training them and making sure they know our resources so that they can interact with the public in the way that they normally do. By achieving this, we try to do hands-on education. And one of the ways we've been working within UCIPM for the last decade or so is hands-on training to get the visual samples in front of them so they can see it, so they can feel it, they can realize the size, which may look different than what you saw on the poster. Pest ID is really important in IPM, as we all know. But we've also been doing hands-on exercises with pesticide label reading, and I'll show you some pictures throughout. But our approach with this is a train the trainer hands-on module that we are providing as much material to these extenders of information so that they can in turn train or hold events for the general public to magnify our efforts. And we work with many partners within the UC Cooperative Extension and even outside California to make this happen. So for Master Gardeners in particular, we do their initial certification training when they come in to become Master Gardeners. And then we hold every few years an advanced IPM training where we have these hands-on components. We invite experts to come and speak on the topics that the Master Gardeners are telling us they get quite a few questions on. And then from these training programs, we provide train the trainer materials so that they can use these materials to go train others. So this could be in the form of loaner kits. So the pesticides that you see numbered on here, we have boxes of labeled unfilled pesticide containers that we received from the manufacturers that have never been filled. So they don't have pesticide residue as, you know, we empty them out and rinse them off. And so we provide these as loaner kits along with scripted PowerPoint presentations and other handouts after they have received this advanced training so that they can recreate the training back in their counties and communities. And we have found this to be very successful in the pesticide safety training. And also we have loaner kits for things like beneficial insects and lookalike insects that we make available to the Master Gardeners and other partners. One of our important partners for retail employees is a program in California called Our Water, Our World and the IPM Advocates. And they've been around for maybe 20 years, the Our Water, Our World program, and they work directly with retail stores. So we partner with them, and they're mostly in Northern California through Central California. But we work with them because they're in the store and they are speaking with the owners and the managers and the buyers of the product that they sell in the store, and they work with them on some of showcasing some of the lesser toxic materials and their displays. And so we train them annually on new issues and new products, and they really help us understand what's new and what's going on out there in the stores. And so it's a really good partnership, and they are mostly funded by their local stormwater agencies. But our initial project with them was through some California Department of Pesticide Regulation grants. And so here are some of the scripted PowerPoint examples that we put together. So we train using this, and then each slide has a script that we provide to our participants that they can turn around and then go give. And we have a number of these available from many years of training. So it's not just on pesticides, it can be on other issues as well. We have a lot of printed and online resources within UCIPM. And while these can be for the Master Gardeners and the retailers to share with the general public, we also have an extensive website that I'm sure most of you have seen that has a good deal of information that any urban and community user can come and access at any time. And we are always doing updates for our information to make sure that they are as up to date as possible, and adding new material as we hear there's a need or as we have more and more invasive pests in California. But so here is the UCIPM homepage website. Within that website is the home, garden, turf, and landscape pest pages, where all of this is compiled and where I think I live most of my time. But we have these outreach resources that folks that we've trained or even the general public can come and find these resources, borrow some of the resources, or receive them for free from us so that they can extend them to their clientele. So we have posters, and we have what's in the right part of the screen, these printed cards called quick tips. And those are available in English and in Spanish. We make them available free for UC Cooperative Extension offices and Master Gardeners. And then we have the touchscreen portable IPM kiosk, which is just a little program within this computer that you see in the middle. They're not as popular anymore, and they're not updated. So it's a tool that we're not using quite as much, But at the time when the kiosks were first unleashed, which was about, I'd say 12 years ago, they were really popular, and it was a really innovative tool at the time, and something that was we were able to put in retail stores and libraries and other public venues that didn't require an internet connection. So folks could come and print out from the little printer that you see some of these quick tip cards that they could take with them. And it was a really good tool, but is now out of date, and the ability to update it is not possible. But we're constantly putting together more materials to increase the ability to reach folks in different communities. On our website, we have a plethora of resources, both for pest identification and for decision support. So what's shown on this screen is just a few of those offerings. We have a key for folks to identify their ant species so they can know the proper way to control the ant. We have a really popular weed photo gallery where it makes it easy for growers and home residents to identify their weed and then find management information. That's one of our most frequently accessed tools on our website. And then we have a natural enemies gallery that we encourage people to look at so that they can see whether it's a pest or it's a beneficial insect, so that they can know what it's doing and not hopefully kill it. Another newer tool that we have is the plant problem diagnostic tool, where you go in by your host plant to find the possible pests. And what our website used to have was just the list of the host plants and then the list of the pests that attack it, including invertebrates, plant diseases, and vertebrates or abiotic. This tool allows you to go through and diagnose using the elements on the left-hand side of the screen, where you choose your plant type, which plant it is. So is it citrus, or is it a tomato, or is it, a sycamore? And then from there, you choose the part of the plant that is being damaged and what the damage looks like. And that greatly narrows down the potential for 800 different pests that are on our website to maybe under 10. And so it's a really great tool that was many years in the making, but it does help folks to identify their pest. Our newest that has barely even hit the airwaves yet is our wildlife pest identification tool that allows folks to identify whether they have a vertebrate pest based on signs of damage, tracks, or scat. So this tool, they would come in here and they would either choose the damage or the droppings or tracks, and then that would give them a list of potential pests that match those selections. And from there, hopefully the homeowner can say, well, I've seen some squirrels, I haven't seen rabbits, and they can go through this narrowed down potential list to get at the information. And if that doesn't seem practical, they can go back and make new selections. So we are increasingly putting together these support tools so that folks can hopefully answer their own questions, since we don't have the enough staff to do all of that. For pesticides, we also have decision support tools that live within our published pest note publications that someone can read all about an outdoor pest. And then when it gets to the chemical section, they can compare the active ingredients that are effective and mentioned against that pest. And what you see in the middle, this compare risk chart, is people can see the potential hazard of using these pesticide active ingredients to aquatic wildlife, the natural enemies, honeybees in particular, and then to people. And then they can make a decision based on these hazards. Now, I don't have time to fully explain how this chart works and what the LH and the M and the things mean. We are updating this resource so it is a bit more easy to use, but all the information is there from science-based peer-reviewed information that we've funneled into this decision support tool. And then we have bee precaution support tools as well that also talk about, in particular, these active ingredients to various bee species. All of that information would link to other pesticide and water quality information on our website, including some videos on what's in pesticides. We have tried to create resource pages for different audiences so they can come in and find our sort of honed information that is particular to their jobs or who they identify with. So we have a page for those who work within schools and childcare centers, landscape professionals, structural professionals. We have a page for retail nurseries, and we have a page for master gardeners. And all of this just links back to our main page, but this we've sort of put together the resources particular for those. For all of our users, we have online training courses. They can be viewed for free, but if someone wants continuing education units, they have to pay for them, and we do offer discounts if you take your course early enough before the license is due. And most of these are approved for continuing education in California. But again, the information, the courses can be viewed for free by those in other states. And we are more and more, as we find that travel is limiting and reaching people is more difficult, we are creating more online courses to try and reach as many people as possible, both licensed and unlicensed. And then in reaching the different audiences, we have specific printed or online information that we package in different ways. So we have two newsletters. One is the Retail Nursery and Garden Center IPM News, which is funded by USDA NIFA project. We will be changing the title of that to be more inclusive once this next grant cycle is over, to just urban and community news or some catchy title like that. But what we do in this, and this is directed towards both the retailers, master gardeners, and the general public, is we publish reviewed articles on various topics having to do with all the different types of pests, pesticide safety, pesticide application, and as you can see, natural enemies, to try and make sure that people are understanding what they might be using or doing for pest management. So that's kind of for the general public. We also have another newsletter that is also published 3 times a year for licensed professionals. So this is geared at structural and landscape professionals. So the information may be very similar, but it's professional use pesticides that may have different names, or things that are not available to the general public, and other considerations that professionals may need that the general public may not be concerned with as much. So these are free to the public. Anyone could subscribe to either one of them, but we do try and tailor the information for the target audiences. And then we take the articles from these newsletters and we put them on our blog. So we have a urban and community blog called Pest in the Urban Landscape, where we post these articles and then link them back to our website so that it extends the information, and we try and maximize the traction that we have with the efforts put into writing these materials. And then everything gets shared through social media. And as most of you are probably doing as well in your own programs, making short how-to videos that people really enjoy watching. And we've learned over the years, 3 minutes is too long. Wait, 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes. So now we're looking at like 30-second videos on how to do something, so that people who are, quickly looking for, how to solve an issue can find it, and they don't have to sit there for too long. And we found that the shorter our videos, the more interest they'll get. Interestingly, so all of our videos, all of our urban and community videos have also been translated into Spanish. And a few videos have more uses than any other video that we've produced from our program. So the one that's shown there, the Cómo usar un detector de chinches de cama, is how to use a bed bug detector. It has received almost 2.5 million views. and the English one is maybe not 100,000 even. So, you know, putting things in other languages that increase the accessibility is something that we're trying to do as well. So we're really trying to maximize our efforts. And then finally, as Paul was mentioning, you know, communicating risk, communicating science-based information. This is something that all of us within UCIPM have really started to take a harder look at. How is the jargon? How is the reading level? How is the terms that we use, and are we listening, and how do we really get this information out to folks in a way that they want to hear it, that is also accessible in more ways than whoever's on Facebook and whoever goes to a Master Gardener table at a farmer's market. And so we're continually evolving our program to um, improve our ways of communication to urban and community audiences, and hopefully see some increased IPM adoption and behavior change. And that is all I have for now. I know I went really fast, but there's a lot there. Thank you.
There is a lot there, Carrie. No, for sure. Um, so again, if anybody has any questions, by all means, take your mic off of mute or drop your question into the chat. I'll have to admit, I dropped mine into the chat by mistake. I was just actually just writing something down that I was taking a note of. So that's not like, if nobody else has a question, I can pose that one. But otherwise, if anybody else has a question, by all means, fire away.
Well, while people are formulating their questions, I will answer that. Matt, I don't know if you were at the meeting where we discussed our website. It didn't crash, but it was really slow one day. And this was a couple of years ago, and we didn't know why. And our IT supervisor looked into it, and one pest note was accessed about 10,000 times in an hour, something
Well,
like that, 6,000 times. And it was leaf-footed bug. And it was because of a Reddit article. Somebody posted a question on Reddit. Somebody said, look at this resource for leaf-footed bug. And people just thronged to our website all at once, it seemed. And it really slowed things down. So if 40 million people went to the UCIPM website sort of all at once, yeah, that would, it wouldn't be able to handle it. But if they routinely went to the website, I'm hoping we could handle that amount of traffic.
thanks.
So yes, I have a question. Of course I do.
Hi, Janet.
And your stuff is always so awesome, but how do we, I think I'm struggling as you are. How do we get that information out in different ways?
Yeah, it's
Have you
definitely.
guys started podcasting?
Have we started podcasting? No. It's, you know, people will make suggestions about podcasting, and Pinterest was a strong suggestion for a while, and I'm not sure if that's as popular as it used to be. But how to get it out to people is something that we're really looking into, and we're trying to step back from ourselves within IPM, thinking that everybody thinks pests the way we do. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that we're looking into is partnering with the other programs within um, the agriculture natural resources. So 4-H and our nutrition advisors, they are going in talking to people about nutrition, and the master food preservers, and 4-H is talking to kids, and they talk about the environment and they talk about beneficials, but everybody works separately. And so if you're going in to talk to a low income household about nutrition, let's also talk about pantry pests. Let's also talk about cockroaches, right? So we are trying to train them on the very basics so that they can at least hand out some of those cards. And we can't do the same thing. And we don't want to be knocking on everyone's doors if someone is already servicing them. But there's more to it, you know. There's
Between
just so much.
yours and Paul's talk, I mean, it just keeps, and the other thing was, hopefully some of the folks here on this IPM hour will be in Denver in July for that IPM meeting. And then surely I will see both of you and Paul present in Denver for IPM Symposium, right?
I hope so. Well, I am supposed to present. Don Gouge, who was here for a little bit today, is organizing something perhaps with you too. And then Lucy Lee and I are trying to organize something, and Al's been invited and others, so that we can continue sharing this, what we've done, but also get ideas about other ways, because sometimes we're busy doing the thing, but to have other successes, oh, that's a really good way to do that. We hadn't thought about that. So, as you mentioned, if podcasts are the way to go, then perhaps we should do a podcast.
What I'm thinking is more out loud, and Matt and Jim, I'm gonna go ahead and put Farrar under the gun on this one as well, because I know his other gig. Again, synergize. I mean, school IPM, we work so hard at trying to make it easy for those that are running in their states to have stuff. And we kind of got there, and then it's kind of withered, but I keep seeing it everywhere. And I keep thinking, I'm looking at your two newsletters you do for 2 different audiences 3 times a year. And I'm like, if I just had that and just push that to my agents, they'd be as happy as clams.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's something different, but it's something applicable.
Yeah.
To a lot of different people.
Yeah.
And you guys push out some really good information.
Well, and as do you, and I feel like I constantly get ideas from other cooperative other states that I'm like, oh, that's really good. But if you are saying here in Texas, I can't just take it and plop it. But I've emailed you a few times. Can I republish this? And same thing with Arizona's information, and something that has really become apparent. And I probably should call you, Janet, so we can talk about this. But what's really become apparent in the last few years is that we all have diminishing resources, but yet our populations and our clientele are only increasing. And the issues, as Paul was mentioning, and what I meant, the issues are not going away. So we need to come together and share resources more than we have before, because we don't have as many of the advisors, agents that we did before, or everyone's just so busy. So if you're writing up something that I can use, and I'm writing up something you can use, or sharing things, and however we can not put too much extra burden on ourselves, but sharing information that has already been written well and reviewed by another entity, that we can just repackage if need be.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Carrie. Excellent point. And I'm sorry, I think we'll probably have to break the discussion. I'm sure that you guys will just continue to discuss this on into the summer, and probably into the fall as well, at all the opportunities to do that. So I want to thank our presenters, Carrie and Paul, for providing 2 excellent talks, and thank everyone for attending today. And enjoy your summer. We won't see you until September, so everybody should have the opportunity. That way, nobody will feel the need to have to come to the IPM hour during the summer. I know that that's a heavy burden and responsibility, but you'll be relieved of that burden during the summer, and we will see everyone back in the fall. Steve, it sounds like we already have at least one speaker for the fall. Do you want to announce that person, or do you want to wait?
My brain does not let me remember things that are happening in September.
Oh, sorry.
We'll wait and announce it in a newsletter upcoming.
Outstanding. Thanks again, everyone.
All right,
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
nice to see you.